All right, we're live. Can everyone hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, Alexander can hear me. Peter can. How is everyone doing out there? This is Duran Live number 20. We've done 20 of these live shows. If you guys can hear me, let me know in the chat. Hello from Belgrade, Serbia. Hello, Belgrade, Napa Valley, California, Westminster, Colorado, Seattle, Australia, Wingham, UK, Dover, UK, Rileyville, Virginia, Seattle, Canada. All right. Thank you, Imre, for your super chat that you gave to us. Good morning, day, afternoon, evening. Pick one. Oh, it's a super chat. So pick one, guys. I don't know whether it is morning, day, afternoon, evening. Welcome to Duran Live number 20. And I have with me for our 20th show, guys. 20th show. I have with me the host of RT's Crosstalk, the one, the only, Mr. Peter Lavelle. Peter, we're at number 20. How does that feel?
And they're 2 hours each. They fly. They really do.
They really
do.
Great. It's great. And we have in London, the Oracle of London, editor-in-chief of the Duran, Mr. Alexander Mercouris. Alexander, how you doing today? How's London?
London is its usual dreary self, at least weather-wise. I feel great, and as I said, it's actually glorious to be on the 20th show.
All right, great. Catherine White from Sydney, Australia. Good day. Thank you, Catherine. Good day to you. Alex Fletcher in Liverpool. Good day. Frank Hoffman, Alabama. Greetings from Croatia, from London, Mississippi. Very cool. Very cool. All right. Greetings from Brooklyn, South Africa, St. Louis. Imre was right. Could be evening, morning, afternoon. Got people from all over the world tuning in, and we thank you for stopping by to listening to our chat. Guys, remember, you can always send us a super chat. We really appreciate it. You can donate to our PayPal and Patreon. The links are in the description down below. And of course, you can go to the Duran shop and pick up a t-shirt. That also helps us out. And remember, every show that we do, you can get it on iTunes and on SoundCloud in audio format. And let's get going. We have some questions that people gave us before the chat started. And Alexander, you're in London, so I'll throw this one to you. It's from Mr. Wigster. And he wants to know about what's going on with the yellow vests in London.
Yeah, I mean, we had a relatively small, and by British standards, exuberant but never violent protest here from the yellow vests. I think the political situation in Britain is different from France, and I don't think this is going to catch on in quite the same way as it did in France. But people in Britain are following the yellow vest protests in France very, very closely indeed. And of course, there are many of the same issues in Britain that there are in France. We have an economy that's at the moment sagging. We've had prolonged period of depressed or low wages. And of course, looming everything, we have a political crisis with a very dysfunctional government, which isn't managing the Brexit process at all well. And of course, next week, we are supposed to be having a big vote on Brexit. There's some talk that it's going to be postponed, though Theresa May denied it today. So it's not surprising that there was an attempt to stage something similar in London. But though, as I said, the situation in Britain is in some ways similar than in France, the political culture here is different. We don't protest in the same way that the French do. We don't have a tradition of revolution and of uprisings the way the French do. So it's not surprising if it was on a fairly quiet scale, but don't be under any illusions. People in Britain are pretty worked up about things at the moment. So they're conscious of what's happening in France, and we need to follow the situation in Britain very closely. And I would not be surprised if a little further down the line, come a year or two, you start seeing people in Britain who are on the strong Brexit bandwagon, and some of the yellow vests in France, some of the people there coming together, as has happened in the past.
I think, just if I could interject here, it's something that I've been watching very closely for the last 2 years. And, we have governments in the EU and the United States, and they're always talking about GDP or indices on stock markets and all of this. But that's so disconnected to the average person. And I think this is what's really frustrating, because you can say, well, look at the disposable income has gone up 2 or 3% in the last year. Well, that's good, but is it enough to live on? See, this is the problem here, and this is where these elites, and I think particularly in the European Union, are so disconnected, because they look at these numbers, but they don't see how people live, and that's how they look at everything, is through these indices and not from the ground up. So I think this Yellow Vest movement is going to catch on, because it is a form where people, it's a way to protest the status quo. And that's the problem, is the status quo. And the elites are going to fight tooth and nail to keep it, because they benefit enormously from it. But it's a system that doesn't work for the average person, and it works for fewer and fewer people. Look at what's going on, like in the United States. I think Alex, Christoforou, we talked about this a few months ago, where there are people making $150,000 a year in the United States, and they're still living paycheck to paycheck. This is really extraordinary. The number of times we come across articles and studies where 60, 70, 80% of the American population can't get their hands on $400 if they needed to in an emergency. You know, and we're talking about people that make, you know, or 100, 150, maybe 200, 6 figures.
Yeah,
okay.
6 figures, yeah.
This is really extraordinary. And plus, again, new studies find, and it was Zero Hedge featured it, the number of states where the number of young people from 18 to 34 live at home, and they go break it out by state by state. It's huge numbers now. And a lot of them they're in debt slavery. So they're in debt slavery. They're living with their mom and dad in the basement. And this is impacting the future of an entire generation. So what we see now with the Yellow Vests and the frustrations with Brexit, that is just the surface of a lot of the social problems that are facing the West in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everything you said, Peter, I entirely agree with. That's entirely true.
Yeah, well done. We have 2 questions, and I'll throw them to you, Peter, from Klivek King. And the first one, I know you'll answer very quickly. So here it goes. How long is Poroshenko allowed to declare martial law in Ukraine?
Well, it's been lifted, okay? And so my answer is, the question is, I will change the question if it's okay. How long will it take for him to re-invoke martial law for some kind of contrived incident? Ukraine's at war with Russia. No, we still have time before the presidential election. The last time I heard, he's still in a single digit, so he's going to look for a provocation. Oh, they're brewing it up right now. So buckle up and brace for impact. It's coming, and we'll get martial law again. And maybe it'll be so dramatic, and the cameras will suddenly be there to all capture it. And then they'll have to put the election on hold. And everyone will clap their hands in the West that Poroshenko is trying to save democracy. Mark my words, you heard it here first.
Well said. And Klivek King would also like to know, would Iran be more difficult for the U.S. to defeat in war than Iraq? You have these political nutcases like Bolton and Pompeo and always confused Nikki Haley. This is like their own political algorithm, regime change in Iran. But the guys over in the Pentagon know it's a lot different. Sure, the United States could handily destroy Iran, handily. But the law of unintended consequences, where Iran would be able to strike at American assets all through the Middle East, would be devastating. And that is the reason why they won't do it. Because look at the Saudis with all of their billions and billions and billions of dollars of hardware. They don't stand a chance against the country like Iran, that actually now has indigenous technology, doesn't rely upon foreign military technology. Yeah, Iran could be slaughtered, but the slaughter that it could incur on American assets and allies in the region are enormous. Essentially, what you're looking at is a third World War type event. I mean, this would be absolutely devastating, because the one thing that these
people that I mentioned, these neocons and their stenographers in the liberal media, they don't understand one simple thing, is that the current political configuration in Iran, in Tehran, their most important mission is to survive, is that the Iranian Revolution of 1979 survive. And they will do everything to ensure that it will survive. That means it will take a lot of people down with it. And any right-thinking general in the Pentagon knows that.
Right. Okay, let's get to a couple more questions before we go into the chat and get to some super chats. Alexander from Alexander would like to know Serbia. What is Serbia and its position in relations to East and West?
Well, that's a very interesting question and a very good one, because of course Serbia is a Balkan country. It's an Orthodox country. It's a Slav country. It's historically had very close relations with Russia. Russia went to war in 1914 to defend Serbia. Russian volunteers went to fight for Serbian independence from Turkey and to help the Serbs in the 1860s and 1870s. If you're familiar with Russian literature, you will know that in Anna Karenina, Count Vronsky, Anna's lover, joins as a volunteer to fight alongside the Serbs against the Turks. There's this very strong, very deep connection, and it's a connection that many Serbs themselves feel. They have long and often looked towards Russia as a friendly country, and Serbs overwhelmingly do think of Russia as a friendly country. It's a place where Russia has a good reputation. There is, at the same time, within Serbia, a very large and very vocal and very well organized pro-EU lobby, which has managed to a great extent, especially since the fall of Slobodan Milosevic, which it largely achieved. It has always pushed for closer integration with the EU and for Serbia to be integrated with the West and with the Western powers. It's not exactly anti-Russian. That's not a sustainable policy in Serbia, but it is definitely pro-Western. My sense is that over time, I know others think otherwise, I think that pro-EU sentiment is weakening. This is despite the fact that lots of people come up with all kinds of demographic studies and point out that young people tend to be more attracted to it than older people, and that as the population changes, in theory, that should mean that over time, the pro-EU, pro-Western element will get stronger. I think that is a wildly wrong mechanistic view. So I think that, in fact, the pro-EU position is, in fact, weakening. But a Serbian government, any Serbian government, and has to try and balance these two different discordant and contradictory flows within Serbia. I think a lot of people criticize the current Serbian government for being a bit too close to the West, a bit too closely integrated with Western policies and too appeasing of Western policies, even though it originates from the more nationalist and patriotic and orthodox and pro-Russian side of Serbian politics. I'm not sufficiently informed about Serb politics, domestic Serb politics, to say whether that is a justified criticism. My own personal view is that, as I said, over time, we will see Serbia and Russia drawing more closely together as the attraction of the EU weakens, as it is doing everywhere in Europe now.
It's very interesting that the Serb situation is fascinating to me, because it's a case of elite capture by the West. Soros, NGOs, exchanges, and all this elite capture. And it's a very effective, if devious, policy, but it works. But the other issue in play here is the trials and tribulations of the EU, yellow vests, what's going on in Italy, what we have, Brexit. These things also influence the perception of the EU. I mean, is it really a club you want to sacrifice someone? I mean, the Poles are not very happy about it. The Hungarians aren't very happy about it because they have to give up their culture and traditions. Does Serbia want to do the same thing? Also, there's always that nagging issue, and the Western political elites don't like to say it explicitly. Some do, but they usually don't. Is that EU membership essentially means a pathway to NATO membership, and selling NATO membership to Serbians that's a tough sell, even for people that look to the West. It's just too close to the illegal attack on the former Yugoslavia by NATO. So there's still people that I mean, it's very much in a lifetime experience. It's not that far away from us. So, Serbia is very complicated in that sense.
It's true. Can I just add one quick thing about Serbia, which is, of course, a point never to overlook, which is that Serbia is a very old country.
Yeah.
It's got a long civilization. It has a very strong identity, a very high degree of consciousness and self-confidence as a nation. And that, almost by definition, means that though the elite capture that Peter talked about is absolutely true, there will always be countervailing forces within it. That kind of society is much more difficult to manipulate than some others.
Yeah. Let's do one more question before we get to the super chats and some other questions in the chats. Peter, this is an interesting one. Oneist socialist would like to know, question regarding geopolitical power. Is there a disconnect between the size of an economy expressed in GDP and its actual productive capacity, and which best determines potential power in the world? So I guess the question is, how is GDP linked to potential geopolitical power?
Well, it's you always hear these things. Russia has the economy the size of the Netherlands, or Russia has the size. Texas has a bigger economy than Russia. You hear pundits say it all the time. It's really quite meaningless. Okay, Russia can put men into space. So, the United States can't do that right now. Okay, maybe they will soon. Russia is a nuclear power. It has the capacity to protect itself. It has a growing middle class, even though there've been bumps in the road since the end of the Soviet Union. The boom bust cycle has been more or less beat. They don't have to worry about that so much. Disposable income is getting higher and higher as wages are stagnant in the West. Creates expectations, and expectations create frustration. So, these macroeconomic numbers they're interesting, but they don't tell the whole story. And I think it's very easy for the West to show their superiority when they play with numbers like that. Russia has virtually no external debt. It has very little domestic debt. So it has many more tools in its toolbox than I think all of its critics have to say. So GDP is important, but it's certainly not the whole story, far from it.
All right, and let's get to the super chats, guys. We have some great comments. Luke B, great show, guys. Cher Burkett would like a Whelan update. Yes, we are going to talk about Whelan. That's for sure. That's a great story. And Gord Orlad says 53K subs after less than a year. Pretty awesome. Duran going to be hundreds of thousands by next year. Guys, we owe that to you. And if you share this channel with everybody you smash that like button, you subscribe, you're going to help us get to 100,000. And we really appreciate everything that you guys do for us. We really do. And we have Klaas Norin, who sent a super chat. This is a great question for both of you guys, because it relates to both of you gentlemen. Here we go. How to become as knowledgeable as you guys in foreign policy. What to study, history, world wars, politics. What knowledge is key? From another foreign policy addict. Who would like to take that?
I defer to the, I'm going to call them the London Eye. I'm going to stick to my turn. Go ahead, Alex.
First of all, the first thing is to be interested. If you're interested in something, you can find your way very quickly. But obviously, a knowledge of history is essential. But you have to read the right history. And that is a big subject, because so much history that is now being written is not being written by people who I would call true historians. An awful lot of it is propaganda, to put it crudely. So you have to find out who are the real historians, and you've got to read it, and you've got to study it carefully, and you've got to keep a sort of clear overview of what it's about. The second thing is obviously you've got to keep an eye on the media. And I don't just mean the mainstream media, but also the alternative media that is now emerging. And if you go onto our site, onto the Duran, you will see that we put up regularly links to articles in all sorts of places which describe all this, and give a good overview, a good picture of what's going on. And last but not least,
articles, Alexander, if I can interject very quick, articles that you and Peter are reading. I mean, literally, you guys are waking up in the morning,
absolutely,
having a coffee, and you're going. I mean, if you guys want to, you're reading these articles as you're sitting down, starting your day, and you're sharing it with everybody.
Exactly. So you get a very good picture, if you like, of what we are reading. And then, of course, the other thing that you need to do, and is very, very important, is you need to look at what leaders say, and at what, say, Donald Trump is actually saying, what Vladimir Putin is actually saying, what Xi Jinping is actually saying. Don't let the media, especially the mainstream media, filter and mediate it for you, because especially in the context of those three leaders, and they're the three most important leaders in the world today, anything you read in the media is almost invariably a misrepresentation of what they're saying. And I can say that with absolute confidence. And you have to, I mean, all three have very good websites. The Kremlin has a superb website, actually. Gives you everything that Putin actually says. You get a real sense of the man and of the kind of person he is. Donald Trump, the White House website is pretty informative, actually. And of course, you can also look at lots of things in China. They don't have quite the same thing, but Xinhua, the Chinese official news agency, the People's Daily, Global Times, which is the one that we repeatedly provide links to, which is the semi-official English language version of the People's Daily, written for foreigners, for outside people to read. That gives you a very clear idea of Chinese thinking on any particular subject. But in order to understand what is going on, an understanding of history is essential, and of looking at the way in which great powers interact with each other through time. Because I'm going to say something else. Yes, there are important differences to the way the world is now, but in many ways, the game as it is being played now is not so very different from the way it's been played in previous times.
One of the things, I agree everything that we just heard here, but another thing I think is important, is kind of a pillar, is what does international law say? And that really helps a lot. The disputed territory of Golan. Well, no, it's not disputed. I mean, the New York Times, that's what the disputed. No, it's illegally occupied.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Okay. The land dispute on the West Bank. No, it's not disputed. It's illegal. Russia annexed Crimea. No, it didn't. A legal definition of annexation is taking land through force.
Yes.
When was the invasion? When was the force? How many people died? That was not an annexation. I'm not really sure what it was. It was an expression of self-determination. The INF Treaty, Russia is violating it. How? It's the U.S. government, the Pentagon has never stated how, but Russia must be violating it. Iran should not be allowed to fire missiles into space. It's wrong. It's not illegal. Okay, you don't like it, fine. But there's no international covenant that Iran has ever signed that denies it its ability to develop that kind of weaponry. It's just simply not there. We could do hours in hours of examples like this. So look at the Kerch Strait there, Kerch Strait where we had that flare up. I mean, look at the international covenants and agreements. Ukraine was obviously in violation, but you never hear that. You never read that. What are the rules, the laws, the covenants? Yes. That way you have a much better understanding of what's going on. And the quality of journalism is simply appalling, because they are just stenographers for power. You know, we lost Robert Perry a little over a year ago. I mean, he was such a giant, because you know what he would. I'll tell you. I'll make a confession here right now. Let's say we were doing a program on Iran. I would read what Robert Perry had to say a few hours in the studio, because God, he gave you everything you needed to know. You know, he really was very thorough. There's so few people out there. That's why Consortium News, antiwar.com, The American Conservative, which is fantastic on foreign policy. Ron Paul, what did he really say to Donald Trump? Don't trust the New York Times. Yes. Look what he said.
Yes.
All right. I read what was in The World According to Garp. What was it? Get committed and stay committed. And that's really what it is. What it is that I put in 4 to 6 hours every single day reading various sites, and sites that I don't always agree with. Foreign policy. You know, it's kind of low octane thinking. Sometimes there's some good articles. The national interest sometimes can be fantastic. Sometimes it can just be a propaganda rag, depending on what you're reading. Okay, you have to be able to start delineating what is propaganda and what is analysis. Okay, and it takes a long time to get there. I'm a former academic, and I would read when I was in graduate school, I read a book a day because I had to for my exams. And a lot of it was Eastern European and Russian history. And, and just having a very good, solid basis in European history in general. So you have to commit to it. And maybe write to the editor of the Duran, maybe we can get a good syllabus for people if they want to, spend some time on their Kindle and get up to speed. It's well worthwhile.
Yes, it is. Alexander, we have a super chat from Muramasa. Once again, the jihadists have begun fighting each other in Idlib. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham have begun taking over other smaller groups such as the NLF. Will the jihadists eventually wipe themselves out?
No, they won't wipe themselves out. I think anybody who thinks that, I'm afraid, is being over-optimistic. What will happen, what invariably happens, is when fighting like this takes place in a particular place, like in Idlib or elsewhere, is that the most hardline, the most extreme, the most ruthless, and the most murderous jihadis are the ones who ultimately always come out on top. That is why I have to say this straightforwardly, it is essential to restore legitimate government to these areas. It is absolutely not a good idea to wait and hope that these people will wipe themselves out by themselves. If you do that, what will eventually happen is that the most extreme group, which in Idlib province, let's be quite clear about it, it calls itself by different names at different times, but it is Al-Qaeda. It is in fact connected to Al-Qaeda Central, which is based somewhere in Afghanistan or Pakistan or somewhere in that part of the world. But it will be that group that will establish itself as the power in Idlib, with all the very dangerous consequences that flow from that. So a legitimate government has to be restored to that territory, and that legitimate government is the government in Damascus.
All right, Bobby Renero, today's my birthday. Cannot miss you guys. President Putin did a nice speech for New Year's Eve. Yes, he did. Happy birthday, Bobby. We wish you well. Thank you for your super chat. Miss K, Peter, what would happen if Europe dropped the EU and we returned to national states?
Well, ask the UK how hard it is to get out of it. Okay, number one, would anybody be left standing once they got out after all of that? I don't see an end to the EU anytime soon. But when Richard Sakwa, which I think is one of the best experts on Russian politics and on Ukraine, he came in and he visited me in Moscow before the Brexit vote, and I asked him what he thought, and we both came in agreement. Basically he said he wouldn't call himself a Brexiteer, but the EU needs really dramatic reform. It really needs to decentralize so many of these things. I mean, why in the world does an EU bureaucrat have to decide the size of a beer glass? I mean, I think local communities can take care of that themselves. Okay, I mean, and it's so terribly wasteful. Really, the EU's mission is to destroy the nation state, and that's why it has to stop doing that, or it will end itself. The EU will. it will go, like I've said in previous podcasts. I mean, there's a core group of countries, you know, Benelux, you have Germany, in France, if they can hang on, but you know, it could be more decentralized regionally. And I do believe that they could be different tiers of the EU and different countries using different currencies. Like Greece, for example, should have gone back to its local currency, okay? Because the fact that it didn't do it just sentenced it to generations of austerity and poverty and anger. So what would it, you know? That's a really big question. A lot would happen, okay? Because really, what, you know, and Alexander Mercouris and I remember this, and it was the European Economic Community. Yeah, I'm for that, okay? For the free trade of goods, not labor, goods. And you know what? That's what made Europe strong, strong. And then they started fiddling it and creating a political project. That was the mistake. And the current leadership in the EU, they can't admit they made that mistake because that mistake would destroy their livelihood. You know, there's no crisis if you're at the top. Everything's just hunky-dory. You know, you got your walls around where you're a gated community, all right? Even though Donald Trump wants to build a wall, the U.S. pays for walls all over the world, okay? Except for the America can't have one. You know, these elites are just too fat and happy, and they don't care whatsoever about the average person because you're not good enough. We will show you the way. That's another problem of the European Union. It's cultural arrogance.
Yeah, elitism to the max. Yeah. Okay, Alexander, we have a super chat from Afterglow. Can we expect a false flag chemical attack in Syria just before the U.S. troop withdrawal?
I'm waiting. I'm waiting.
Lots of people ask us this question, and surprise, Bolton actually has warned against a chemical attack and said again that the United States will react if there is one, essentially saying that the Syrian government will do it, which is, of course, in effect, an invitation to people in Syria who want to keep the United States in Syria to launch a chemical weapons attack. Because, I mean, they will say, since you're always going to blame the Syrian government, and since you're always going to attack the Syrian government, if such a thing happens, let's do it so that we can get an attack on the Syrian government organized. I will say what I have said many times. I think that danger is a very real one. It exists, and it is a big danger. I think that on balance, Turkey, which previously has to some extent been complicit in these attacks, is probably less happy to see one happen now because it complicates its diplomacy with the Russians. I think personally that in spite of some of the things you've been reading and hearing over the last few days about the US slowing down and all the rest, I think the US is ultimately going to leave Syria. I think the Turks know this, and I think they realize that they have to broker a deal with the Russians. And I don't think they want the complication of a chemical weapons attack in Syria at this time. And I think they will be warning all the various jihadi groups over whom they have great influence not to go down there. Having said that, can I say definitely no such thing will happen? I cannot say it. Given the region, given the country, given the people who are there, given the fact that we have people like Bolton who would clearly love such a thing, that possibility is a very real one, and we must always be concerned about it.
Well, and also, if I could, on a slightly different topic here, Bolton now has moved the goal post again. We haven't heard Donald Trump talk about it, but Bolton unilaterally apparently has moved the goalpost. We can't leave until we know that there are security assurances for the Kurds. Okay, so now here's the new goalpost. Well, and then at the same time, we have a State Department official involved with dealing with the war on ISIS. The U.S. hasn't been fighting ISIS for a long time. As a matter of fact, it's been aiding and abetting it. Telling the Kurds, don't go into negotiations with Damascus, but which of course is exactly what they are doing. They will do, and the Turks actually want them to. They may not say it publicly because Erdogan doesn't want a full-fledged war in Syria. Before Trump's announcement, it was bluster, the usual stuff from Erdogan. Now he's sweating. He's like, oh, we might have to do something now. I mean, Trump really screwed it up for everybody there because everybody had their angle. Trump took a piece off the table and he says, go ahead and play without me. It changes the way you see the game. And it's very, and ultimately it's a positive thing here. If we have this malignant influence of John Bolton and others, it's going to make it a lot harder. But no, the players on the ground, they know this, and they're working towards that end right now. Bolton and his ilk, they're just nuisances, real nuisances. Okay, yes. And since we're on the topic here, and it's something I said in our last chat. What's the first thing the U.S. Senate is going to do? The government is shut down. The United States is bogged in wars around the world that are all unwinnable. The budget deficit now is $1 trillion. The national debt is $22 trillion. And they want to rebuke Donald Trump for his Syria policy, bipartisan. All right. And in the same legislation, or the same rebuke, is that the U.S. has the government has the right to penalize people who support boycotting Israel. What a remarkable first day of the U.S. Senate. Okay, I mean it really is pathological, really pathological. The deep state, these political elites, cannot wean themselves off of empire. Like I've said before, it's the glue that keeps it all together. So, you know, when you have little boy Marco Rubio leading the charge, you know you're in trouble.
Yep, left and right are addicted to empire. And while we're on empire, Peter, we have a super chat from Bobby. Why are we still sending U.S. troops to North Korea? Why is the U.S. sending troops to North Korea? How long do you think the U.S. troops will be there? And what is the purpose?
Well, I think she means South Korea.
Yeah, South.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at the defense outlays of the Pentagon, South Korea, Okinawa, Japan, that's good money. You can throw in also the arms sales to Taiwan. I mean, they've gotten used to decades and decades of just billions of dollars being funneled into their projects there. They like it. They like it a lot. They don't want that to go away. Peace is bad for business when you look at these defense companies. And it's no surprise that it's the U.S. that is playing the role as a barrier to moving towards a peaceful possibility for North Korea. We have said many times on this podcast is that the path towards a normalization on the peninsula is very, very difficult, and it will take a lot of time. The good thing is there appears to be goodwill on the Korean peninsula. This is a first of this magnitude. And that's why we have to keep pushing it. But you have the Defense Department, and of course people like John Bolton wanting to slow it down. Mike Pompeo, well, he's just such an egomaniac. He really is. He just has to be on Trump's side. He has to be in front of the camera. This guy's turned into a complete diplomatic failure of unbelievable magnitude. Trump needs to get rid of both of them as soon as possible. And I'll finish on this. Donald Trump better not take his eye off the ball, because again, John Bolton very publicly is going around his back. And if Trump wants to save his administration, look, the government shut down. You have your lieutenants sabotaging you on the world stage in a public way. Again, we've always said he has an HR problem, a huge one.
Yeah, guys, thanks for the super chats. Keep them coming. You guys are asking great questions. To Alexander from WD Fussroy, does Alexander now believe that Trump is using Bolton to try and walk back his promise to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria?
No, I don't. I mean, I think, as I said in a recent program, Alex and I have done, I think that the slowing down process, if I can put it like that, is one that in fact is not unwelcome to many of the parties in the region. I think the Turks and the Russians and, of course, the Kurds would not be entirely sorry if this process took longer than 30 days, simply because, as Peter already said, they need to sort themselves out, and they haven't really got to that point where they've negotiated it out fully between themselves. So, for example, Pete is absolutely right. The Turkish army doesn't really want to go into northeast Syria and fight ISIS there and risk ending up in another war with the Kurds and with the local Arab populations, which would be extremely damaging and very expensive in lives and money for Turkey, and which could very well undermine the stability of the Turkish government.
And can I just throw in here also is that because of the purges that Erdogan has committed in the military ranks, there are some very big questions about the competence of the even the highest levels of the military right now. He got rid of a lot of people, and so he needs to restructure his military. He's not in a position to have a major operation, a major front open up. If he does it at his peril. I'm sorry, Alexander Mercouris.
No, but I agree with that. I think that's a very good point, by the way. But can I just say about Bolton? Of course, Bolton, in my opinion, has a wholly different agenda from Trump, because Bolton doesn't want to leave Syria at all. So Bolton's not really slowing it down. He's trying to sabotage it entirely. And of course, most of the people who are directly involved in the negotiations in Syria, Ambassador Jeffrey and all the rest, they're answering at the moment to Bolton, not to Donald Trump himself. Now, I personally think that Donald Trump is absolutely fed up with Syria. I don't think he was ever committed to this project with the Kurds. I don't think anybody ever asked him about it. I think they just went ahead and did it without his knowledge. I think he is very well aware that his own base strongly wants to see this withdrawal happen. And I think that Bolton is pushing his luck by trying to keep this policy alive and to get round Trump by keeping those troops there, not just longer, but indefinitely, in order to continue pursuing this grand plan. Now it's partitioning Syria, but we all know that ultimately it's still regime change in Syria. And I think what was eventually going to happen is that Donald Trump, if this continues for much longer, is going to lose patience with Bolton, and he's going to lose patience with Bolton over Syria. He's going to lose patience with Bolton over Korea, because the very valid question just before, which Peter answered about the troops being sent to South Korea to complicate the rapprochement process between the two Koreas. Bolton is entirely behind that. Trump has spoken in the past of withdrawing US troops from Korea. I think sooner or later, if this trend continues of Bolton acting to sabotage the president's wishes, I think he will one day find that he's out, like so many other people.
But the interesting side effect of that would be, and we've hinted at it in previous conversations, is that what Donald Trump has to do, and don't misunderstand us here, we're not in lockstep with Donald Trump's foreign policy, not at all. Okay, on Syria we're in agreement. Okay, and withdrawing from Afghanistan, honoring the wishes of the Iraqi people for the foreign forces to leave. You know, I'm all for those things, but the establishment isn't, and the media isn't. You know, I watch these people on NBC and CNN. I mean, they have no idea what they're really talking about. It's really amazing. It's like Onion TV, you know. My point is that Bolton knows, because he's a devious guy. He's a real devious infighter when it comes to bureaucratic politics, is that if Trump gets rid of him, what could happen is that you're going to get the Lindsey Grahams and the Marco Rubios. They're going to start saying national security is at risk, because John Bolton apparently is the adult in the room. Now, my point is that Trump has to be worried that currently he's impeachment proof because of the Senate. But if you get enough Republican senators annoyed with Trump's foreign policy, then it's a totally different ballgame. Totally different. Because they don't have any allegiance to the legitimately elected president of the United States. Their interests lie with like AIPAC and other lobbyist groups. That's what keeps them in office, keeps them in power. So Trump has to be very careful, because then he could inadvertently unite the Republicans and the Democrats in the U.S. Congress against him. And don't underestimate how important empire is to these people. They will be more than willing to throw Trump under the bus to keep their empire.
It's a great point, Peter. Great point. I think a lot of people don't mention that point either, that it's not Russiagate that may be the end of Trump.
No.
It's the fact that he's dismantling America's empire.
Or suggesting that it's
suggesting to
right.
do it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, again, with Russiagate, I know, because I watch the mainstream media. I know they're having a lot of fun with it still. I mean, it just goes in one ear and out the other for me. It's just like, this is ridiculous. What a waste of time. If Russiagate had any validity whatsoever, we would have heard about it. It would have been leaked. Okay, so there's nothing there. It just keeps talking heads on the networks churning away. It's a complete diversion. And we have said many times here, why don't they really investigate what happened in 2016? How the U.S. government, the FBI and the Department of Justice tried to influence the outcome of a presidential election. That's the biggest political scandal in American history. But you wouldn't know that from CNN.
No, you would not. Happy Zorro sent a super chat. Alexander, has the Russian air defense system in Syria worked? Would it prevent a U.S. raid?
Right. Well, first of all, I think it has worked, because let's be absolutely clear about it. If it didn't exist, we would be getting Syrian a U.S. raids, not just on the Russians there, but far deeper into Damascus and the rest. We have to go back to 2015 and remember why the Russians went into Syria in the first place. ISIS obviously was on the march in eastern Syria. Al-Qaeda was on the march in northern Syria. But the thing that triggered it was that there was reports, and they were true reports. I mean, they were absolutely correct, which was that the Obama administration was coming round to a proposal from Turkey to establish a no-fly zone over Syria. I mean, we were within months of that. And the Russians rushed in, and eventually they rushed in their air defense system, and they prevented that from happening. So it is extremely effective. And on various occasions, when the US has crossed the line with the Russians by bombing Syrian troops engaged in anti-terrorist operations, the Russians have switched off the deconfliction hotline they have with the US, and they've used their radars to paint US planes, that's to say, put radar images of US planes that are flying there, which tells the US pilots that they're being tracked and could be shot down. And on every occasion that that has happened, the US has drastically reduced its air operations in Syria. And as we saw a few weeks ago, after the shooting down of the Russian Il-20 surveillance aircraft during an Israeli raid, important to stress, it was shot down by a Syrian air defense missile. It happened during an Israeli raid. The Russians again reacted then, and the result was again that the Israelis cut back drastically their air activity over Syria, and they're now having to carry out raids, apparently hiding behind commercial airliners, as happened recently in their raid in Damascus. So yes, it is working. Now, I have to stress, though, obviously, it is not a miracle weapon. If the US and Israel threw every asset they had in the region to swamping it, then of course they would swamp it. But if they did that, we would have an international crisis of a like we have never seen. And of course, at the same time, the US and the Israelis would suffer very real casualties whilst that happened. So that is why it hasn't happened, because the US and the Israelis realize it's a very potent system, don't want to risk the losses that would go with it, and certainly do not want to risk the major crisis with the Russians that would come from it. But certainly it has been an effective system. I'm not a military expert, but the facts as they played out in Syria over the last 3 years speak for themselves.
You know, and it's very interesting. If you look at, you know, particularly since the Vietnam War, the U.S. in its global military outlays, think about it, it always fights countries that can't really protect themselves, protect their sovereignty. But Iran can, and that's one of the reasons why they're very hesitant, trying to swamp Syria. Yeah, sure, the American military could make a short order of Syria, but the consequences of which would be immense. There would be a huge loss of life all through the region, including Israel. And this is something that they can't contemplate. And that's why, I mean, and the Russians are very smart about that, you know, put these advanced anti-aircraft systems into Syria, and they know the Americans and the Israelis are going to think twice. They really do. But when they're not there, well, they will, you know, I've forgotten the number. Over the last couple of years, over 200 sorties the Israelis have flown over Syria. Now they do it with great hesitation because there could be loss of life. And if the Syrian regime is threatened with extinction, the Iranians will get involved, and then we go down that path, the scenario that I spoke about earlier. And then it will be a free-for-all. I don't think many Saudi oil fields will be left untouched in a conflict like that. What would that do to the global economy? See, this is what these armchair intellectuals or low-octane thinkers in the political class have to consider, because somebody's going to say, oh, you better not do that. Remember, after the 2016 election, it was reported that the United States should send some kind of cyber warning to the Russians, like shut down their banking system. And apparently someone, I guess, leaked the conversation and told Obama, well, if you take out the Russian banking system, they'll take out our banking system, and ours is a lot more sophisticated, and they have more sophisticated tools to do that. So maybe you shouldn't do that. Again, they won't attack people that can defend themselves and fight back.
All right, we're approaching 1 hour, 1,272 people online right now watching the show. Guys, share the channel with everybody you know. Get them on board so we can grow this community even bigger. Let's shift gears a little, Peter, and let's talk about Mr. Whelan, arrested in Russia for allegedly being a spy. And Cher Burkett would like to know, the U.S. has also arrested another Russian national in another country. That is the Mariana Islands.
Saipan, yeah.
Yep, Saipan. Get into that a little bit, Peter. What's your take on Whelan, and what's your take on this latest arrest?
I am not going to answer first, because right before we did this podcast, I watched your interview with Alexander Mercouris. So I'm not going to do it, because all I'd be doing is copying what he said. I want Alexander to answer it, and maybe I'll throw in a couple. I'm just trying to be honest.
Alexander, we did the show. I wanted to get Peter's take on it, but let's.
Oh, you got to just give us a précis of it, okay?
Well, briefly, I think he probably is a spy. I mean, I don't think that the Russians arrest foreign citizens on espionage charges without cause. That's not something I've ever heard the Russians do at any time since the end of the Second World War. So I'm pretty sure they have a very strong case against him. And I think as time moves on, I think we're going to find out more and more about that case. I made some, I think very well informed guesses that it's perhaps connected to various leaks we've been having in Britain, especially some through the Bellingcat site, which have been providing classified information about some members of Russian intelligence services. I think the Russians have suspected a leak, and I think they've acted to plug it. And I think they think Mr. Whelan is perhaps involved in all of that. That's how it looks to me from the glimmers of information we've got. And frankly, I think this is an arrest of a spy of the sort that we get quite often and have seen quite often since the start of the Cold War. Now, as to this person who has been arrested in Saipan, once again, we see the United States, its long arm. It arrests Russian citizens in all sorts of countries around the world for violating American laws. It doesn't look to me, frankly, like this is a hugely serious case. I don't personally think that this person has been involved in any massive criminal activity from the sound of it, which is not to say that he hasn't been involved in some things that are wrong. But again, I don't like the way people who move around the world far from the United States are being arrested and taken to the United States in this fashion. And I think more and more countries are now starting to become increasingly concerned about it. I think we saw that with the Huawei executive in Canada. I think that we've seen the Chinese respond by arresting people in China, who I think that is a reciprocal step. I don't think this arrest of Whelan, by the way, was such a reciprocal step, not directly, because as I said, I think he probably is some sort of a spy, or at least I think the Russians think he is. But I think that at some point, this is going to escalate. We will be seeing reciprocal arrests. And I think at some point, the United States will probably start to realize that this is not a good way to go about things.
Yeah, this Whelan thing, I mean, until we learn more, I mean, I think he's kind of just a small fry.
Yeah.
Okay, I from what we've learned from various sources, Russian and Western reporting, if that means anything anymore, he might have, it looks like he was involved in some kind of nefarious thing, but pretty low level.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think it could be, you know. Okay, this guy is screwing around. We know exactly what he's doing. He's been coming here for years on end. We know who he's talking to, and we know what he's interested in. Okay, but I think there's a constellation of forces right here. Okay, pick him up. Book him, Dano. I mean, you do it. We could do it next month or the next month after. But book him, and we're going to send a political message. Okay, you want to start playing this game. We know what American citizens are doing in Russia. Well, and some of it isn't very good. It's kind of low level. But if you want to start picking up people like you do to our guys, well, then we can go down that path. It's up to you. It's just like Obama. Do you want to have a cyber strike on Russia? Because if you do, it's going to come right back at you. So
Indeed.
yeah. So I think that's the kind of multi-layered situation we're in right now.
Yeah.
Peter, did the ministry issue the Russian ministry, foreign ministry, issue a travel warning for Russian nationals? Is that true?
No, I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it has. In fact,
Okay.
In fact, you will find that we provide a link to an RT article which discusses it. I mean, that Russians
was it a travel warning, or was it?
It was basically a warning. It said that any Russian who may feel that they have some issue with the United States needs to be very careful if they're thinking about travel plans about where they go to. So it was not the kind of really strong warning that you sometimes get, avoid a particular country. It's more a general warning, but a warning has now been given. Can I just, by the way, deal with a specific point that Peter was making about Whelan? First of all, he might be a spy. He might not be somebody who was working for US intelligence directly. I mean, there are some people who do this sort of thing on a kind of freelance basis, and you do get this. Now, the other thing I wanted to say, because there's been a lot of circulating stories about how the United States always uses diplomatic cover for its spies, and that its spies are always embassy personnel. First of all, that is not true. That has never been true everywhere and all around the world. But there would probably be a problem about doing this in Russia now, because one of the things that people have completely forgotten or overlooked is that in 2017, the Russians radically cut back the number of US diplomats that are allowed in Russia now. So the entire US intelligence operation, as it had previously existed in Russia, was essentially broken. So if Whelan is in fact working for US intelligence, it is perhaps not so surprising that he was not working through the embassy, because that may be extremely difficult now. There are lots of unanswered questions about this case, but as I said, I personally think that the Russians would not be charging someone with espionage if he wasn't indeed some kind of spy.
Mm-hmm.
Peter, what do you make of the media's covering of Whelan in the U.S.?
Well, obviously they see it as some kind of a quid pro quo. You take one of ours, we'll take one of yours. There could be some element to that, as I mentioned here. But Alexander Mercouris is right. They wouldn't do it. I know this will sound really hard for some people to believe, but they're just not going to make up a case against someone. They knew what he was doing, and they lured him into a sting. Okay, essentially is what happened.
Right.
Okay, and unlike the way Russian citizens are treated by the American authorities, the U.S. ambassador here, Huntsman, talked to this Whelan guy. I mean, that's really unusual. I mean, he's just a U.S. citizen in Russia, and the U.S. ambassador, the whole embassy's getting involved here. That is very unusual.
He's a UK citizen, an Irish citizen.
Yeah. No,
citizen.
If you get in trouble, I mean, you have recourse to the consulate, okay, because they have consular affairs for American citizens, and they take care of it. Why is the ambassador involved in this? Unless the political establishment and the media want to make this into a big deal.
Yeah.
We don't know enough yet, okay? But the fact that Huntsman got involved in it, that really kind of surprised me. I mean, this Whelan guy, I mean, he was given a bad discharge from the military for larceny. I mean, this guy, he fiddled with the books, apparently. Nobody in his family knew about all these things. It was all kind of a surprise. I mean, he's a very oddball character, but I guess when you're in this line of business, if he's in this line of business, you are, by definition, an oddball.
Yeah.
Very good point. Let's get to a super chat from Muramasa. Would like to know, Alexander, in December of last year, a referendum was held in Egypt for exiled Libyans on who to vote for the future presidency of Libya in spring 2019. They overwhelmingly voted for Saif al-Islam Gaddafi. Will Gaddafi have a chance to be the leader of Libya?
Well, very difficult to see it happening anytime soon, but I think that it would not be surprising going further down the line, if I may say so. The great tragedy in Libya is that it was subjected to an illegal war, a violent illegal war, a war of aggression, which overthrew the Gaddafi government at precisely the moment when Saif al-Gaddafi was becoming more and more influential and appeared to be preparing to take Libya towards a more, shall we say, democratic, I think democratic is too strong a word, but a more, shall we say, open future. And Gaddafi was actually, Saif al-Gaddafi actually studied in Britain. And I think he was at the London School of Economics. And I think people who actually came across him there were quite impressed with him, not perhaps because they thought that he was a particularly brilliant man, but because he seemed to them to be genuinely well-intentioned. I think a lot of people in Libya think he is genuinely well-intentioned. And when people in Libya and people in Egypt who are exiled from Libya, and I'm sure many Libyans in many countries, look back on what has happened to Libya, how it has gone from being by far the richest country in Africa to becoming one of its poorest, where it's gone from being a politically stable and secure country to being a country which is in a state of permanent civil war with violent militias and jihadi groups operating all over the country. It is not surprising at all that people look back on the Gaddafi regime and say that was in some ways a good regime, at least for Libya. And they look at Saif al-Gaddafi, who was the likely successor, and say maybe he is the person to come in and sort it out in the future. The one thing I would say is, looking at the balance of forces in Libya at the moment, I think it is going to take a great deal of fighting or negotiation or diplomacy before there's any possibility of a constitutional process that would bring Saif al-Gaddafi himself to power. I mean, it's very difficult to see how that can happen whilst these militias remain active in Libya itself. And given the nature of that war and the utterly brutal way in which Gaddafi himself, Muammar Gaddafi, was tortured publicly and killed, the emergence of another Gaddafi as the leader of Libya would frighten many people who were implicated in that war and who would inevitably fear some degree of retribution. So I don't discount it. I think there may come a time when we might see him playing a role in Libyan politics. I don't think it'll be anytime soon.
Well, I'm a slightly more optimistic that it possibly could happen because, I mean, okay, Gaddafi Sr., he was a strong man. Okay, I guess that's a fair term. Well, the word democracy doesn't come to my mind very quickly. But what he was able to do was to balance out the interests and claims of the different clans that populate Libya. And I don't know why Gaddafi Jr. wouldn't be able to try to start applying that. Gaddafi Sr. ruled with an iron hand, yes, but in other ways he had to compromise with a lot of different interesting groups in Libya. That's how, I mean, tyrannies can last just so long. You can rule through fear for a while, but it's a corrupt way of ruling, and it always fails. What Gaddafi was able to do was able to balance different interests. And I think that's a natural pattern of the political culture of Libya. And I think we should actually, from the outside, promote it. Okay. Yeah. Will it be democratic? I don't know. And I don't care. I care about results. That's what's most important. Stay away from this secular religion of the West. It's democracy. That is just an insult to your intelligence. Look what's happening in Brexit. But people voted for it. But, you know, so stop. I really wish these people would just go away with their democracy promotion. It's just a cover for asset grabs and forced regime change, forced ideological change. Don't say democracy in front of me because it's a very tainted word.
I'll be very careful in future.
That's right. All right. S. Fensel, thank you for your super chat. We appreciate it. To Peter from Luke, a super chat. Might the wall be in the U.S. defense budget?
I've come across a lot of reports here. I mean, if you look, I mean, Donald Trump, as president of the United States, can call a national emergency. He could divert funds from the Pentagon that have already been allotted. I think technically it's possible. Is it a good idea? I don't know. I really think there should be a deal made. But you know, what's happened here with Donald Trump is, and also I don't know if the Pentagon would go along with it. Okay, I mean they have an amazing ability to drag their feet. Okay, I mean look at the entire post-war history. The Pentagon, if it doesn't want to do something, it can avoid it for a very long time. But Donald Trump, he's the wall. He's owned it, and if he can't get the wall, he's done. He's done. Okay, and he knows it. So if it means clawing money away from the Pentagon from their shining little toys, he might do it. He may not. He's really put himself into a position where he might have to do it because Congress. I mean, and it's not because the Democrats are going to say no forever. It's because of feckless Republicans that won't go along. Okay, I mean, they had their chance to do it, and so Donald Trump is left with this. That's what he won on. And if he doesn't get what he wants or close to it, he's in very dangerous political waters. Very, very dangerous for him. And he knows it. That's why he said he will shut down the government for years. I mean, I think that's great. I hate government. Okay. I mean, maybe this is a new way of reforming government, not having it.
That's true. That's one way to go about it.
Can I just venture an idea? Because I should stress, American politics is not. I don't have this feel for American politics that Peter does, because obviously I've never been an American. But it seems to me that yet again there may be an element of political calculation in all of this, in the sense that Donald Trump sees the Democrats taking over the House of Representatives. The Democrats have been threatening all kinds of actions against Donald Trump. By Donald Trump himself setting up a confrontation with the Democrats right at the start on a subject like the wall, where Donald Trump has the support of his base, means that the first battle between him and the Democrats in the House of Representatives is on ground of his choosing and on which he feels comfortable. Now, I don't know how good or deep a tactician Trump is in these things. But I wonder whether there isn't some element of calculation about this, in the sense that the Democrats are now going around getting angry about the wall and talking about the wall, and
it's immoral. It's immoral, Alexander.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
No, but abortion isn't immoral. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, but it actually puts him in a position where his first battle with them is on ground of his choosing. And as I said, it seems to me, again, it looks to me from London as tactically quite astute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. And
well, I mean, but the danger is See, you know what? When you said tactician, you know, the first thing that went into my mind and said, and not that I'm a big fan of the guy, he doesn't have a Karl Rove at his side.
No.
Okay, because it seems patently obvious that Trump doesn't understand how the government works very well. No. Okay, and he doesn't have people around him to be able to get things done. It's a great film, All the Way, and it's about LBJ. It's a great film, and it shows how LBJ had to work with a democratically controlled Congress to push civil rights. And Johnson was a devious guy. He knew all the rules of the Senate and how the House worked, and he was able to go through that maze to get what he wants. Trump doesn't have someone like that. And you're telling me $5 billion? I mean, that's what they probably collected from the Saudis because they forgot to charge them for refueling planes midair. There's probably more than $5 billion, okay? Don't tell me it's about the money. I mean, the government is amazing at wasting money, but at least you get a wall. You can look at it. You can knock on it. You know, you can throw stones over it. At least it's real. I mean, look at all of the money they poured into Afghanistan for 17 years. For goodness sake, I was in Kabul about 4 years ago. The only new thing I saw was a huge mosque in the center of Kabul. The rest of the country's a shambles. Where did the money go?
Yeah, $5 billion is something that Hillary Clinton collected for the Clinton Foundation when she was Secretary of State. So it's not hard to come by that money.
Wait, only if Hillary was for the wall, it would happen, wouldn't it? It would happen in a snap.
Yeah, she's for a barrier, not a wall.
Yeah, well, she's the ultimate barrier to morality. Okay, let's keep going.
Let's keep going. Alexander, we have a super chat. It's not a question, but it's more of a statement, but you can comment on the statement. It's from Johnny 5. The problem is the international banking and financial elites who act with impunity above the law and by governments with the wealth they have stolen. The central banking system must fail. What do you think about that, Alexander?
Well, I think there's a lot here. I mean, I personally am somebody who believes that central banks and central banking, if done properly, is necessary to regulate financial flows in a modern economy. But anybody looking at what has happened in the West over the last 30 years has to come to the view that, frankly, finance has got completely out of control. The economies of the Western states have been, to an extraordinary degree, taken over and are operated now in the interest of financial interests.
Exactly.
And those interests have created a massive economic crisis in 2008, which we are still struggling with. And to an extraordinary degree, they not only were not punished for doing so, not a single person in Britain, by the way, where we have one of the biggest financial markets in the world, has been charged with anything or faced any kind of prosecution for any of that. But instead they were rewarded because they were all bailed out. And they were all bailed out at the expense of everybody else who's had to pay in terms of austerity and taxes for the bailouts of the financial industries and the banks, which continue, as far as I could see, in exactly the same way as they had done before the crisis, and are completely uncontrite about what they do. So when people say that the world today is run by these financial interests and it is run in their interests, I understand exactly why people are saying that. And one has to say that there is a great deal of truth to it. I don't think it is the whole truth. I think there are also other powerful players. I think, we've talked about the deep state, we've talked about the military complexes, we've talked about all kinds of people who operate there on the sidelines, the intelligence services, political parties, ideological groups, whatever. But finance certainly has been overwhelmingly and dangerously strong. And it has weakened the world economy in many ways. It has lost its way. And it has also, as I said, failed to bear the consequences. And a lot of people would say it is above the law.
Well, I guess simply put here is that Wall Street and Main Street are no longer on speaking terms because Wall Street doesn't need Main Street. Okay, they don't, because finance do not make the following mistake. Finance has nothing to do with the condition of the economy. Nothing. Okay, it's called the financialization of the economy. Remember, a share price used to be about the health and condition of a company that made something or provided a service. Now, that ended in the 1980s. Now it's you tell stories about your stock price and what you can do with it and how you can manipulate it. It has nothing to do with the real economy. And that is the great disconnect. We, outside of it, I used to work in finance, okay? It's horrifically corrupt and immoral because it doesn't think about the economy at all. The economy and finance they're like, planets apart. Okay, and this is the problem here. We need finance to service a prosperous economy of individuals and families. That's how they've lost their way.
All right, 1,400 viewers. All right, that's awesome. Keep sharing the channel. Keep hitting that like button, guys. From Cosmic Singularity, a super chat, $99 super chat. Thank you very much. Keep up the great work, guys. The Duran is one of the best sources for news and information on the web. Thank you, Cosmic Singularity, for that generous super chat. And we have another super chat from W.D. Fussroy to Alexander and Peter. Do you agree with independent journalist Graham Phillips that Bellingcat is closely tied to the MI6?
Well, of course, they vigorously deny it. and who am I to say that denial is false? I mean, I don't think they're closely tied to MI6, to the Secret Intelligence Service, in the sense that I don't think that they are part of the same organization. I don't think these people are run by the same people. But they are involved in other organizations like the Atlantic Council. I think Elliot Higgins is a fellow of the Atlantic Council.
What a joke.
And Dan Cachetta, who I believe is another prominent person in Bellingcat, is involved in this integrity initiative that we've been hearing so much about in Britain, at least so I understand. And that, of course, seems to have connections with British intelligence. So, and of course, it's inevitable that if they operate in the way that they do, taking such a very strong, indeed strident, pro-Western position on everything, and such a strident anti-Russian position on everything, they will undoubtedly come into contact with people from the intelligence world, even if they're not aware of it. And can I also add, there are always cutouts. People can always pass you information, and you may not realize who they are. I mean, I'm afraid it happens, and you've got to be extremely careful.
Cut out. That's the perfect way of describing it. Cut out. Yep.
Very well said, Alexander. And we turn to our weekly segment of Justin Trudeau, hosted by Peter Lavelle. Peter Lavelle, what do you think of Justin Trudeau getting a second term this federal election in October 2019 to continue to destroy Canada?
Unfortunately, he'll probably win because the opposition is in disarray. I feel so sad for Canada. I really, really do. Canada needs a lot more than virtue signaling. And Trudeau, Dummkopf, okay? I mean, the Germans have a great phrase. He's obsessed with Schnapsideen, okay? I don't know why these German words come to my mind thinking about that nitwit. But look at Canada's standing in the world. annoyed a lot of people, and Donald Trump hates him. Okay, good job, Justin. I mean, keep that ship going straight ahead. Okay, I think that as we speak now, he'll see another term. But it's not because it's because of the negatives of the way the opposition is perceived, and it's fractionalized and divided. Unfortunately, get your act together and save Canada. I don't know how much more you guys can take of this guy that likes to walk around in Indian clothes in public.
All right, from okay, Lulu Bob's. They will never say anything negative about Russia. I don't know why we keep on getting these chats. There's a lot of that. We've said a lot of stuff about Russia, negative and positive, and U.S. negative and positive, and the U.K. negative and positive.
Well, anyway, why does it have to be negative? Why? I give pragmatic answers. So if you give me the right question, I will give you a pragmatic answer. All right, I'll give you a question. Is there income inequality in Russia? Yes, there is. It is a problem. And I see it every single day. Pensioners, and we've talked at length on these podcasts about pensions and income inequality, and the government needs to do more. I'll give you another criticism. Serving members of the military are not properly housed in this country. It is a national disgrace. One of my producers on Crosstalk, her family, after years and years in a humiliating situation in active service, they finally got an apartment. Okay, that is shameful. So don't say we don't say anything. Ask us intelligent questions, and we'll give you a pragmatic answer.
Indeed. There is so much we could talk about that. Yeah,
and if you guys would like us to do shows on domestic policy and domestic issues in Russia, we'll gladly do it. I mean, just let us know in the chat if you guys really do want us to.
But if you're really interested, learn something about it, then ask us questions about it. Okay?
Yeah, ask us questions. And
I mean, you're essentially asking me how often I beat my wife. That's exactly what you're doing with a question like that.
Yeah. So if you really do want us to discuss or touch upon during our show some domestic policy issues in Russia, we've got Peter Lavelle, we've got Alexander Mercouris. I mean, these guys know a lot of what's going on domestically in Russia. If it is of interest, we will discuss it. And there's some interesting things, Peter, going on in Russia, Alexander, domestically. I mean, it's an interesting dynamic of what's going on.
Yes, I mean, for example, just to give an example, there was a very, very interesting law that was passed very recently on animal cruelty. And, this is a subject we can certainly talk about if people wanted, both about the extent of animal cruelty in Russia, which it turns out in some places is a real problem, and whether this, and about this law and what it will do. But we need to have something more specific. If you want to ask us questions about that, we will answer it. But if we discuss things like, say, Syria or foreign policy, we don't act to criticize Russia so much as explain what it does. And that, I think, is what we're trying to do, because, of course, it gets so often so misrepresented.
Yeah, I mean, the way people analyze Russia in the mainstream is so off. So off that I think there's a lot that we add to the conversation.
I don't even recognize the country that I'm currently living in when I read the New York Times or watch CNN. I don't even recognize it.
Yeah. Anyway, let's move on. Afterglow sent a super chat. Alexander, is Corbyn being smeared by MI5?
Well, he's probably being smeared by lots of people in the intelligence community. And can I talk about that? Because, of course, we've had this integrity initiative, which, as I said, is clearly involved with British military intelligence. Now, can I just say one thing, by the way? MI5 and MI6, it says military intelligence 5, military intelligence 6. Those are not actually its real names, and they are civilian agencies. The correct name for MI6 is Secret Intelligence Service. The correct name for MI5 is Secret Service. They were both Security Service. They were both invented names during the Second World War to basically create confusion, which they have done ever since. But certainly the intelligence community in Britain has published smears about Jeremy Corbyn. The Integrity Initiative, which is run by military intelligence, or at least military intelligence seems to be involved, and that is the British Army, in other words, not MI5 or MI6. That certainly published information, smears against Jeremy Corbyn. But for me, the most extreme example of this happened during the June 2017 general election, when Sir Richard Dearlove, former head of the Secret Intelligence Service, i.e. MI6, actually wrote a long article in the Daily Telegraph in which he said, this was during the election, that Jeremy Corbyn was a clear and present danger to Britain. Now, nobody, so far as I know, within the intelligence services came along and said that wasn't true. Dearlove does have connections with the intelligence agencies in Britain. So, of course, he has problems with the intelligence services. And it is a verifiable matter of fact that there have been attacks on him.
Yep. All right. We have a super chat from Penguins fan. More of a statement, but Peter, if you can comment on it. The question goes like this, or the comment goes like this. With all the mess in Europe, Macron, May, Merkel, Trump shutdown of government, if I'm Putin, I'm thinking, do I want to be a part of the West? What's your comment on that statement from Penguins fan?
Well, first of all, Russia doesn't need chaos on its borders. And I know that there's this undertone that the Russians are gleefully happy watching the crisis in the West. That's not true at all. Russia needs reliable partners, and every single one of them has gone down the tube, even if they were disagreed. And plus, I think, and it's possible it could change. I don't think it's likely. I think the Russian political elites have basically had enough of this Russia bashing and this Russophobia. And, if Russia is not going to be welcomed in the West, you're going to harass Russian citizens, then fine. I mean, then we have other options. See, this is what the Western political classes don't understand, is that Russia does have options. And I have to say, and this may sound counterintuitive, but I really wish the moneyed elites, I don't like using the word oligarchs anymore, in Russia, why don't you bring your money back here and stay out of the toxic financial system of the West? Yeah, they tempted you with cheap money, cheap credit. And what they did is they ensnarl you into their toxic banking system and bring the money back, get out of that, okay? And I know a lot of Russians feel that way because the 1990s and the pillaging of Russia is on the memory of just about everybody, okay? And you don't hear a whole lot from those people anymore because they're very well-paid civil servants, okay? And they must act in Russia's national interest. Russia made you rich. Now you help Russia prosper. That's the implicit message. So what I've come across is even kind of younger people, nominally liberal, they now are taking a different look at the West. It's not so glimmering and shiny and noble as the West likes to sell itself. But there's still, and this is a long trend in Russian history, is that there is the allure of the West because it is it's dealing with the Russian identity that is fraught with contradictions. The Russian psyche is very, very complicated vis-a-vis the West. And there are people here that prefer a Western orientation to their own Russian one, and they're a small group of troublemaking liberals in Russia that are adored by Western media and Western NGOs and et cetera, et cetera. But I think as time passes, the crisis in the West is not going to go away. The forward-moving strategies of Russia presently are set to continue. And I'll bring it up myself because it always is brought up. And whoever comes after Putin will continue Putin's ideas and policies of sovereignization and reform.
Yeah. Can I just quickly add something on? By the way, I agree with everything Peter said, but can I just add a little point about Putin personally? Of course, Putin, at the beginning of his presidency, did indeed very much want to involve Russia in the Western institutions and integrate it into the world economy. And he brought Russia into the World Trade Organization, and he was heavily involved with all those things. And if you want to chart the progress of his ideas and see what the end point is, you could do no better than go to the New Year address he's just given, which was mentioned earlier, in which he said very clearly, for our development, we now rely upon ourselves alone. I mean, no longer integration with the West, it's ourselves alone.
Excellent point, Alexander. And it goes back to the question, that super chat where, that they asked, what do you guys do to understand so much in foreign policy and geopolitics? And you mentioned you need to listen to the leaders of these countries. And so you listen to that Putin speech and you get an idea where Russia is heading. Excellent point. And following up on that point, Alexander, Penguins fan sent a super chat, which is, what is the problem with Kasparov? He loves 90s Russia, but hates Russia today.
Well, I don't know what the problem with Kasparov.
What is his problem?
I don't know what his problem is. I mean, he was, of course, a loyal Soviet citizen, as I very well remember, perhaps on the far liberal end of the Soviet political spectrum. But he seems far less happy in today's Russia, where, of course, he no longer lives, than he was in the Soviet Union, which seems very strange to me. But anyway, he is one of these people who obviously did very well psychologically and materially out of the 1990s. He obviously has great issues with the direction Russia is taking today. And I think he now lives in the United States, and I think he criticizes Russia an awful lot from the United States. He has no political traction in Russia at all. I mean, we've talked about Peter talked about various liberal people in Russia and the sort of views they have. I mean, Kasparov is not even part of that group any longer.
Not even part of that group. No, he's still known as a chess master. That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
I mean, he has, if there's any name awareness, it's with chess. Okay. No, it's because the New York Times and the FT, they like him, and that's why you hear about him. But he's not. I mean, I don't pay any attention to him. I mean, he has this app he's running on Facebook, and I think it's kind of cool because he's a great chess player. But that's all I care about. It's like Gorbachev, I mean, he seems like a nice guy, but I don't listen to him. I mean, look what he did. I mean, I remember the infamous dinner where Michael Flynn was at. I was at that same dinner a few tables back. Damn it, nobody widened the frame to show I was there. Damn, why did Mueller, you want to talk to me? I was at the table. I went up to the table. Anyway, I lost my train of thought.
You were at the table. You were at the table with Michael Flynn. Not at the table. You were behind the table.
Yeah, but I forgot why I went there. But okay. Anyway, people like Kasparov are Western inventions.
Yes.
People don't understand this. The West will pick someone and say they represent the embodiment of freedom and democracy of their people. Well, Kasparov only thinks about Kasparov, okay? And he's done really well at it, okay? Fine. But, it's really amazing how the West, and I can remember this was before the internet, but the New York Review of Books used to do this all of the time. They would pick their dissidents here and there and write these great articles about them. But in the countries where these dissidents were living, hardly anybody knew who they were. Okay, this is a very sophisticated propaganda operation that is ongoing and intensified. They look at RT, the center of all kind of fake news. I can tell you that there's so much fake news being generated all of the time with their little clusters of journalists and everything planting stories. I mean, it's called Mockingbird. Okay, I have every reason to believe that it's just in a more updated iteration. Okay, and that's why we're doing these podcasts.
Yep. We have a comment from Johnny5, a super chat, and it's a comment, not a question. But Peter, let's have your thoughts. This is a clever comment. Putin hasn't renamed St. Petersburg Putingrad yet. There's something positive. Since 1989, Russia is more free and the West is becoming more tyrannical. And the way the West treated Russia in the 1990s was criminal. What are your thoughts on that, Super Chat?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you know, I was telling Alex Christoforou before we started this, my line, my part of the line on the metro system is under repair, so we have to go by buses, and it's like done by military precision. It's really done well. I'm very impressed. But you know, I go through the city, you know, on the bus for about 40 minutes. It has 4 stops, and you look around, and at the billboards. It's not one billboard with Putin on it. There's no cult of personality here at all. Russian federal stations, yeah, they cover the president's day. Yeah, they do. Okay, he's the president of the country. But there's no cult of personality here. I don't think it should be changed to Putingrad. I don't think he would appreciate that at all. He comes from a great city called St. Petersburg and went back to its original name. And so he doesn't need legacy. He's already got it. He doesn't have to generate it. He's already got it through his acts and his words.
What about what he did to I would like to say rescue Russia at the end of the 1990s, early 2000s?
Well,
yeah, I mean, you were in Russia, if I'm not mistaken.
I was the whole time. I mean, no, it was he rescued Russia from the system that Yeltsin allowed to develop and take a stranglehold on the economy and the politics. So what he did was he pushed back on it, and he's created a middle class. The irony of ironies is that some of his strongest critics come from the middle class that came into existence under his time in high politics. It's an irony, yeah. Russia was on the verge of falling apart completely, and the West would have been more than happy to have that happen. Absolutely, have a whole group of client mini-states that was part of the former Soviet Union, what is part of today of the Russian Federation. Remember Madeleine Albright? Flippantly said, "Well, Russia should lease Siberia." Really, Madeleine Albright? Oh, the Russians can't exploit Siberia on its own. Only you and your financial clans around you, they can exploit Siberia. And once the flag hits the ground, you never give it back. Okay, yeah. Look at that. That was an article, I think, in Foreign Affairs. Okay, leasing out Siberia. Amazing stuff. Okay, yes. There was never any goodwill, good intentions whatsoever. Russia had to become a minor player in the Western club. That was the only way it was going to work. That's the only way they still see it will work. John Bolton's way of thinking hasn't changed since 1991 at all, and that's what makes him angry.
All right, we got a super chat from Beatrix. The answer to 1984. I don't know if that's a question or a comment, but thank you for the super chat. If there's something more to that super chat, let us know in the chat, and we'll try to answer that question. We have a super chat from Legion Trooper Alexander. Are you familiar with the Bill Browder situation?
Well,
again.
How can one not be familiar with the Bill Browder situation? I mean, he is always there. And I mean, he is somebody who, let's be quite clear about this, has played a huge role in determining foreign policy in recent years. I mean, the Magnitsky Act, which he basically got the Congress to pass, is the first sanction that the United States imposed on Russia shortly after Russia joined the World Trade Organization, shortly after the old Jackson-Vanik Amendment was cancelled. And now we see that he managed to get sanctions passed. And of course, ever since then, there's been that escalation of sanctions. And of course, we hear constant rumbling away by Browder, a continuous campaign that he runs against Russia. Now, it's probably not been very widely covered, but I mean, he recently actually had a not insignificant defeat here in Britain, in that somebody who was associated with him, a businessman in Britain, a Russian businessman, a fugitive Russian businessman called Perepilichny, who was one of the people who had been associated in constructing this story that Browder has. Anyway, he had a heart attack whilst he was jogging and died. And there was a big campaign in Britain in which Browder was certainly involved, which tried to make out that Perepilichny was in fact poisoned by Russian intelligence, the usual stories. And there was a recent case before the coroner's court. This is the court that always looks at cases of unnatural or unexplained death in Britain. And there was exhaustive evidence provided both by the police and by various medical people. And the coroner said there is absolutely no evidence this person was poisoned. So this is one instance where, as I said, a particular story that Browder was trying to promulgate in Britain has failed to catch on, and he lost that particular battle in Britain. But he's there. He continues to be there. He will remain active, I suspect, for a very long time.
Yeah, until everybody sees the documentary made about him.
Well,
Okay.
Well, indeed.
Yes, very good point. Okay, 1776 is the answer to 1984. It's an Alex Jones reference, I guess. Okay, got it, Beatrix. Thank you very much for that super chat. To both of you guys, very quickly, MH17, will the truth ever come out?
Yes, but not very soon. I think eventually we will probably know exactly what happened, but we need to know, we need to have the archives in Ukraine opened and the archives in Moscow. I suspect they will probably be open fairly soon. And we will also get information about what was passing through Western capitals. Now, the Russians a couple of months ago produced what I thought was extremely powerful evidence indeed, based on information that came out of the Dutch-led investigation of the serial number of the missile that shot down MH17. They were able to track it right through to the factory that built it. They knew exactly which day it was built. They showed exactly how it was shipped. They showed which particular military unit had it, and they've positioned it in Ukraine. Now, there's never been, so far as I know, any rebuttal of that story. None of that evidence, so far as I know, has been challenged. It just hasn't been reported. But in time, eventually, the truth about MH17 will out. Now, when will that happen? I'm afraid, again, we're talking about a long time in the future. I remember appearing on a crosstalk program with Peter, and we were talking about MH17 and the subject of that Korean airliner that was shot down over Sakhalin Island in, I think it was 1983, came up, and it turned out all kinds of information came out about that. And that was, what, 40 years after the event.
Yeah.
So something similar might happen with MH17. It may take decades, but eventually the truth will be out there, possibly when it's no longer anything more than a historical interest.
That's exactly the point. And what a way to end that. That's absolutely. It doesn't matter anymore, the truth, because in the West, they're not interested in the truth. Okay. A couple of years ago, I talked to I think he was a Bloomberg journalist at the Valdai confab, and we were talking. I said, aren't you mildly interested in what really happened with MH17? Are you have any interest what happened to those people in Odessa in the trade union building where people were burned alive? Do you have any interest in that whatsoever? And he just couldn't even look me into the eye. I said, I just want to know what happened, okay, and who's responsible. And then once we know who's responsible, then you can take the correct action. But you don't want to know the truth because you already have your mind made up. You don't want to know what really happened. And that's why we got what we've gotten. I mean, Joe Biden, he said he knew who did it within hours of the plane being shot out of the sky. He went on all the Sunday programs. Well, where was the evidence? Okay, he never produced it. They never have.
Yeah. Super chat from Penguins fan Alexander, the Arctic. Who owns the most of it? Which part has more energy, Russia or the West?
Right. Well, Russia has the biggest share of the Arctic. Doesn't have the most of the Arctic because there are many countries around it, but Russia has the biggest share. And I don't know whether that is where the greatest energy resources are, but it is where the greatest known energy resources are. And of course, the Russians have an active program of developing the Arctic. I think there's an article at the present time on the Duran about the fact that the Russians have this very impressive icebreaker fleet, which no other country has anything remotely comparable to that. They have large settlements, cities in fact, in the Arctic, and development of the Arctic is a major part of the Russian government's program for the future of Russia. In fact, the Russian government sees the Arctic as the major region of Russia that needs to be developed economically at the moment. So the Russians are heavily involved in the Arctic. I don't think they have any ambitions to take the whole of it over. There are all sorts of nonsensical articles appearing in some sections of the Western media, certainly of the British media, the Times and the Telegraph being the ones in London that promote these stories in the most ludicrous degree about, the Russians having these grand ambitions in the Arctic. The US, in fact, it was NATO that conducted a big naval exercise in the Arctic near to Russian bases and Russian territories.
And it didn't work out very well.
The Russians have never done anything analogous. And exactly point, because of course the Russians know how to operate in the Arctic. The Western powers don't. All that exercise did is it exposed the fact for everyone to see.
They don't know the Arctic. Yeah, I mean, well, listen. I came across a story. I don't remember all the details, but at the height of the polar cap, the U.S. was thinking about sending one of its icebreakers through, and then decided against it because they thought if it broke down, the Russians would have to rescue them because they have the best Arctic fleet in the world.
No.
All right, we have a super chat from Luke Patrick. I'm not sure I understand it. So, Luke, if you want to elaborate on it in the chat, we'll try to answer it. Why the interest of religious figures in the Antarctic penguins? I'm not sure I understand that super chat. So, if you want to elaborate.
Well, I mean, what happened? I know in some of these settlements here, when people, I mean, they're basically explorers / settlers. You have to remember people that agree to work in the Arctic are paid a premium. Okay, it's tough. It's a tough job. Okay, but Antarctic as well. But the Antarctic is different than the Arctic because the Antarctic is internationally ruled. Okay, a friend of mine was in the Antarctic a couple of years ago, and he said everyone that goes there, because it's international law, there's not one piece of garbage. There's no littering. They're fanatical about not disturbing the environment in the Antarctic, and everybody. Politics is all pushed to the side. Everybody helps each other, and it's almost done religiously. Staying with the word religion, these settlements in the Arctic, they bring a church. I mean, there's not a whole lot to do. Going to church might help your soul because it's either light all time or dark all time. So people bring their culture there with them. I've seen some very beautiful pictures of Orthodox churches in the Arctic. It's pristine. It's amazing.
Well, great question then, and great answer, Peter. God, you do know a lot.
Well, I'll tell you, being a fat nerd in my early childhood is paying off because all I did was read books.
Okay. Now we have one that I do understand the question too, and I'll throw it at Alexander. It's a super chat from Nicholas. What to make of the new Yellow Jacket protests in 2019? Alexander, we have a show coming up on this, but give people a preview.
We certainly do. I mean, two things to say. First of all, I mean, this protest movement has very deep roots in France. I mean, actually, I was speaking to a French acquaintance over the New Year holiday, and she was telling me, how bad the situation is in France and how angry people are in France. But the other thing that's driving this thing is that we have a French president who does everything he possibly can to provoke protesters into protesting even more, because he is so arrogant when he talks about them. He is so unpleasant and horrible about them. And of course, he has, in doing this, the support of a French elite, which, exactly as Peter said in an earlier part of the program, is becoming increasingly disconnected from the life that is lived by most people, or increasingly large numbers of people in France today. Economically, France is intrinsically a very, very rich country. It has always been so in modern history, but economically it is not doing well. People are under a lot of pressure. Taxes are extremely high. Things are sagging. And the kind of things Macron is doing not only favor the rich, and this comment about him being the president of the rich is, to my mind, a very valid one, but he is also going out of his way to knock down those things about France in which French people take pride, talking about patriotism being a good thing and nationalism being a bad thing in France. Talking about merging the French army into some great European army. This is the army, of Napoleon, of Foch, of all of these people. This great martial tradition. I mean, these are things that people in France find deeply insulting and deeply wounding, and which shows the extraordinary disconnection that there is between him and the people around him, the énarques, the people who've been to the various grandes écoles from which he comes himself, these elite educational institutions that exist in France, and the liberal intelligentsia. And they don't really understand the majority of people in France anymore. There's a link to an article in the Duran, which we put up in the Duran, which shows that his popularity is continuing to fall. Now, given that combination, an economic squeeze on ordinary people and an extremely arrogant and unpopular president, in a country like France, with a history of revolution and insurrection, one should not be surprised to see that the protests are not only continuing, they are now starting to grow again. The last protest we had this weekend has been bigger than the ones that happened the previous week. So we need to keep watching this.
Let me tell you an interesting story about, I think, the predicament that Macron is in. At the height of the battle for Stalingrad, Khrushchev was leading the effort of the Red Army, and he went up to Moscow and to Stalin in the Kremlin because Stalin wanted to know what's going on. And after the meeting was over, Khrushchev immediately got into a car and flew back to Stalingrad. And he was asked about that years later, and he said, "I felt safer in Stalingrad than being around Stalin." Okay, why did I bring up this story? Why is Macron acting so crassly, so irresponsibly? Because he's afraid of the people that installed him. He's more afraid of them than he is of the people. That's why we're getting this rhetoric here, okay? Because he's just a tool. I mean, he obviously, when he was elected, I just said, is he an avatar? I mean, is this guy even real? Okay, because he's looking up, okay, and spitting down. Okay, that's his predicament here. And his wife doesn't know what to tell him anymore, okay? Because she did all through his life, but now, he's not listening to mommy because mommy isn't the one with the keys to the kingdom. The people that put him in office, they have the keys and they want results. That's why he's there.
Yeah, he is just following orders. Yeah. That's all he's doing.
Well, that's what it seems. From the outside looking in, that's what it looks like.
We have a super chat from King of Games. Thank you for trying to influence elections by reporting, discussing the important issues like adults. Longtime fan. Thanks, guys. Thank you for that super chat. And guys, I had on the agenda that we're going to talk a little bit about U.S. and China. Alexander, we have a video about that coming up. So because we're running short on time, we're about to approach the 2-hour mark. We'll probably not go too much, and we probably won't discuss U.S. and China at all, because I would like to talk about something that's not getting a lot of press, and that's a question from El Dragon. What about the secession of the Ukrainian Church? What are the implications? We know that this week, I believe it was a couple of days ago, Bartholomew did sign the final decree to break off the Ukraine Church, to create this autocephalous church in Ukraine.
Yes.
This is big news, and the implications are very, very troubling. Would you guys like to comment on that quickly?
I'll defer to Alexander Mercouris.
Right. The first thing to say is that he did indeed sign. I think it was yesterday. The Thomas.
Poroshenko was there.
Absolutely, Poroshenko was there, and the Thomas has now been passed on to this a new Ukrainian church that they've created. Now, can I just make one thing absolutely clear? I've seen people talk about the secession of the Ukrainian church. There has been no secession by any Ukrainian church from the Russian Orthodox Church. The people who were part of the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, which was connected to Moscow, have never asked for any sort of secession from Moscow. They continue to be connected to Moscow in exactly the same way as before. What has happened is that Poroshenko found certain groups of, shall we say, angry or compromised priests or ex-priests who had set up their own sort of minor churches, and he put them all together, and he has now got the Patriarch of Constantinople, disgracefully, in my opinion, to say that these people are the official Orthodox Church of Ukraine, as opposed to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which has existed before and which still continues. This is a very dangerous situation, because Poroshenko is now using the law to try and force the actual Orthodox Church of the Ukraine, the one that has always existed, to change its name, something which is absolutely outrageous. And again, if you go to the Duran, you will find a link there in which the chief rabbi of Ukraine has said that this is absolutely illegitimate and inappropriate. It is the state telling a religious institution what name it should have. And of course, by doing that, Poroshenko is undoubtedly preparing the ground for what I expect he is planning to be a forcible takeover of churches and church property in Ukraine from the true official Orthodox Church in Ukraine, which has, as I said, always existed and which continues. So we are going to see more violence in Ukraine, more crisis in Ukraine. The Patriarch of Constantinople is now deeply complicit in it. He has antagonized the rest of the Orthodox world. The Orthodox Church in Poland being the latest Orthodox Church to condemn what he has just done. So I think it is wrong to call this a schism, by the way, because a schism implies some deep religious conflict within the Orthodox Church world. I think it is the Patriarch of Constantinople and a few people in Ukraine itself. But the potential for violence is very real, and it can increases the potential for instability and further crisis in Ukraine on the eve of the elections in Ukraine, which is exactly what Poroshenko wants.
Well, I just would put on here is that it's very, very foolish to meddle in religious institutions that should have a strict separation from the state during a time when there's upheaval and instability. Messing with people's churches is a really, really bad idea. And unfortunately, I don't see a whole lot of what's the term I want here? I don't see Poroshenko as having a whole lot of goodness in his heart. It's an asset grab, a land grab, building grab, and what is he going to do with it? Okay, I mean, these people have fleeced the entire country since 1991. Now this is the next level of your fleecing. The church, really?
Yeah.
Bad move. Bad move.
Yes.
And Peter, the American ambassador in Ukraine, applauded the effort.
Oh,
Mike Pompeo applauded the effort. it seems that whatever Poroshenko does, he will have the support of the United States, of the West, whatever he does.
Well,
does this make you uneasy as the elections are approaching?
Where's Mr. Saakashvili now? Poroshenko, read up on your buddy, okay? Because that's your fate, eventually. Maybe it'll be worse. What you do is you sell your soul to these people. They don't care about you. They don't care about your country. And when you're no longer of use or value, they will kick you to the side. Read your history.
There you go. Guys, 1,400 viewers. We want to go on for another 10 minutes?
Yeah, 10 minutes. I gotta take the dogs. I gotta take the dogs out.
All right, another 10 minutes, guys, and we'll go on for 2 hours, 10, 15 minutes more. We have 1,400 people still watching this, guys. Send us your questions, your super chats, buy a t-shirt at the Duran shop. Thank you very, very much for tuning in. Hit that like button, share the channel with everybody. Alexander, what about Italy and the EU? Italy's been a little quiet now. Has it resolved its budget issues with the European Union?
Well, if you were to believe the financial press, it has. I don't believe a word of it, actually. I think that the Italians have looked very, very carefully at what the situation was last year, and they remember very well what happened to Greece and how the squeeze was put on Greece. And of course, Italy always has problems within the coalition itself. I think we mustn't understate those problems. This idea that this is a right-left coalition that has come together happily to resist the EU, I think should be put aside. It is an alliance of convenience with great tensions inside it, and not one that might hold together very easily, very well. So they came to some sort of agreement with the EU over the budget, which will temporarily prevent sanctions being imposed on Italy. I think this is a tactical retreat in order to prepare for a further advance later. I think that there will eventually be a crash, because that is where the whole direction of Italian politics is going. My understanding of what is the mood in Italy is that it is becoming steadily more radicalized, and that the government, that the opposition parties are weakening, and that within the coalition itself, the balance is shifting increasingly towards the stronger and more anti-EU elements. So I think we need to keep an eye on this. I think in 2019, especially with conditions in the world economy very unstable, I think it is highly likely that we will see a major crisis between the EU and Italy before very long.
Agreed.
All right, Eagle ASC, super chat.
It'll be a very interesting precedent for other tensions also going to the EU, okay? And Ukraine, you still want to join that club?
I'll say that as someone in Greece and in Cyprus, I don't know what got into those guys to want to join the EU, that's for sure. Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
What did Jesus say to the rednecks? He said, "Don't do anything until I come back."
Eagle ASC super chat. Thanks, guys. Keep up the great work. Thank you very much for that super chat. Claudia Duran doesn't listen to people without cash. Come on. We answer a lot of questions that are not super chat questions. We try to answer all the super chat questions, and we try to answer as many questions as we can in the chat. Guys, there's a lot of questions coming through, so we try to do the best we can within a limited amount of time. We're on here for 2 hours answering your questions. So I respectfully disagree with you, Clayed, but thank you for joining.
Yeah, I mean, you're putting pressure. You're putting pressure on my bladder, okay?
That's right. So guys, I said we would talk about U.S.-China, but just very, very briefly in 5 minutes that we have, Peter, what's going on with U.S. and China? Are we drifting towards some sort of conflict?
Potentially, yeah, absolutely. When we have the leadership of the Chinese government saying prepare for war. What the Chinese see what the Americans are doing. They're using trade. They're using the Taiwan issue. We had in the last day or so, we had a high-level anti-ballistic missiles being fired from the island of Okinawa, which Okinawa is a very important strategic point in that part of the world that is obviously sending a message to the Chinese. The Chinese are reacting. See, what the Chinese worry about, and I don't want to sound alarmist here or anything, the Chinese military just doesn't have much experience doing anything for decades now. The Americans, well, they've been around the block a few times, I mean, a lot of their equipment is worn down, but they have a lot of experienced pilots, and the Chinese simply don't have that. So I think what the Chinese leadership is doing is trying to motivate people. Now they're having exercises using live ammunition. I mean, they're telling the troops, this is real, okay? And the United States is not bluffing, all right? And so the Chinese have to get themselves really motivated, because the American hammer is coming down.
Yes.
Don't have any illusions about it.
Yes.
So it's much more of a preparation. It's more of a psychological training here. But we're, what's it called? It's the Thucydides
trap.
Yeah. And that's what we're facing right now. Look it up. It's interesting.
And Alexander, before you chime in very, very quickly, Gaza West, you asked what happened to your super chat. Maybe I missed that super chat. So Gaza, if you want to just write it in the chat, I'll try to follow what you're saying. We'll try to answer that question. I apologize if I missed that super chat, but put it in the chat and we'll try to answer it. Alexander, sorry.
Yes, what I was just going to say is this, Peter, you're absolutely right. And can I refer you to an article in Global Times, as the semi-official newspaper of the Chinese government, in which they said that China must prepare itself, must be ready for further US provocations. I found that in some ways an even more interesting comment than the speech that was made by Xi Jinping, because it does show that the Chinese feel themselves to be under pressure, military pressure and economic pressure from the United States, and they're starting to push back. And Peter is absolutely right. At this particular point in time that we are speaking now, the military balance in the Pacific favors the US. It will not always be so. In time, the Chinese will get their act together. And if you look at the geography, obviously, they will have the dominant position eventually.
Hence the Thucydides trap.
Hence the Thucydides trap. As I said, does the United States really want to get itself involved in the Eastern Pacific in an arms race with China, a country that has had a far longer history than the United States, that has many times the United States population, which is very nationalistic and patriotic, and which has bigger industrial resources than the United States itself? I can't understand the logic
and
of it.
It's called the South China Sea for a reason.
Exactly.
Okay? It's not the North California Sea.
Exactly.
Here's an interesting question on this note from Reckless Abandon. What happens if China just dumps their treasury notes, guys?
They can't. They can't.
Yeah, exactly. Go on, Peter.
Well, I mean, they can't through time. All right. I mean, what do you want to do? I mean, just out of spite, you want to destroy the dollar. Everybody, if the dollar is destroyed, everybody's destroyed. I remember in 2008, when I was in the newsroom in RT, and somebody was making light of all these bank failures on Wall Street, and I said, I said, it could get to a critical mass where it pulls everything down, including us. Okay, yes. So don't wish for the worst. No. Okay, and the same thing with that. I mean, that's the leverage. Some of the leverage the Chinese have. They are getting rid of them. Okay, they are lowering their exposure. That is going to be the end of American empire, slowly but surely. Yes. It's not the military that is the backbone of empire. It is the global financial system. That's what needs to be avoided. There's a whole literature out there. It's called The World Without the West. And yes. This is what China and Russia, India, who knows what Brazil's going to go. They're going to go down their own really kind of crazy path for a while. We should do a separate program on that, the fate of the BRICS. So, I mean, the Chinese want to lower their exposure, but if they were to completely liquidate that position, that would be that would be beyond traumatic for the global economy.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's go on. Yeah. Yeah, Alexander, let's do a couple more questions. You can comment on Peter. I just want to say we'll do a couple more questions. On the Brazil note, we had a question from Sherbercat, which wanted to know if Brazil is heading towards becoming a vassal state of the U.S. now that you have Bolsonaro in as president. So that's one of the questions. Peter, if you can answer very quickly before Alexander jumps in very quickly on the China thing. Jefferson Free Press would like to know, Peter, will China take Taiwan by force?
No.
Okay. And Gaza West, we're going to get to your super chat question as well. Alexander, do you want to comment on what Peter said on Brazil?
Outright. Firstly, on what Peter said, he's absolutely right. It is not in the Chinese interest simply to dump all their treasury bonds in one fell swoop. It would hurt them probably more than it did the US. But the key point is that the Chinese are selling treasury bonds instead of buying them. And that is happening all around the world now. Yeah. And that is making it more difficult for the United States to obtain financing to cover its growing budget. And that is one reason why interest rates in the United States are rising, which is putting pressure on equity prices. So let us not underestimate what is already happening on the treasury bond front. Now, on Brazil, I'm afraid I think it is highly likely that President Bolsonaro, the new leader of Brazil, will indeed bring Brazil much closer to the United States. If you look at his past, if you look at his thinking, he is someone who has very close connections with the United States, historically, psychologically. He is already talking, apparently, about opening US military bases in Brazil. So I think we've got to accept that for the time being, Brazil is not going to be an active member of the BRICS in the way that it was. Having said which, I don't think Brazil was ever really very integrated.
Well, that's a really good point, and I think Brazil is a even though it has such huge governance issues, like so much of the political South around the world. I think Brazil may be making a bit of more of a balance. I don't think it's going to completely walk away, but I think every regional power in history up until the Cold War, which upset everything, and now we're back to normal times, will always kind of leverage its geopolitical position. And I think that Brazil will say, hey, well, we can kind of still, date the BRICS, but, maybe we could have a, date on the side here with the Americans and see what we get out of it.
Indeed. I mean, Brazil has to always take into account that its biggest trading partner now is China. It's China that buys its goods. It's China that invests in its economy. Yeah. So it can't afford Bolsonaro, who is, in spite of what people say, not a fool, is not going to simply burn Brazil's connections to China. I mean, that makes no sense at a time when he's trying to revive the Brazilian economy.
All right, and Gaza West is a great question to close out. It's a question on Julian Assange. Hi, guys. Could you give me your ideas on Julian Assange, as Ecuador has initiated a formal special examination, Assange's asylum and nationality as it seeks a $10 billion+ IMF bailout? Will this happen? So Ecuador is looking for some IMF money, and you have the Assange issue still hanging.
And Vice President Pence was down there. I mean, obviously this is the our timing is off, but I think our sense of trajectory is correct. Julian Assange does not have a bright future, to put it mildly.
Yes. Well, can I? We've actually done. Alex and I have done another video on the program on this, which should be coming out soon, if I'm right.
Yeah.
There is actually now a glimmer of hope for Assange, and it's come from, of all places, the United States itself, in that Rudy Giuliani has made this comment about, Assange not having actually broken the law and having First Amendment protection rights as a publisher in light of what he's published. But perhaps even more interesting is the fact that there is now going to be this change in the leadership of the Justice Department with William Barr, who is the man that Donald Trump has proposed for Attorney General, being apparently a very, very good lawyer indeed, and probably someone who takes the Constitution of the United States very seriously and might understand First Amendment rights. Now, I don't want to overstate this. I don't know what's going to happen. It's only a glimmer of hope, but perhaps there's slightly more there than was, looked to be the case just a few weeks ago. Carry on.
I don't want to rain, on anyone's party here, but I mean, this has never been about legality. It's always been about politics. So I take your point. I take your point very well. I think it's correct, but that doesn't outshadow the political motivations here. Again, I still believe that Mueller wants to implicate Julian Assange and WikiLeaks to make his case of collusion, which we will never be ever be given evidence. We'll just have to believe him. But Barr, if he becomes Attorney General, Mueller has to send his report to Barr, and Barr will decide what, if any of it, is released. So that's the tango we're playing right now. It's very interesting, and I think Julian Assange and WikiLeaks is part of that.
Well, indeed. So,
process.
I mean, bear in mind, Peter, that Barr has already said that he does not agree with the entire legal basis of the obstruction of justice investigation that Mueller has been pursuing.
But that doesn't allay the fact that there are political motivations here. That's the crisis.
I know. Absolutely,
that's the crisis.
I mean, it's a tiny little glimmer, but I mean, that's all. That's all Assange has.
I'm glad we're leaving on an optimistic note.
Not a very optimistic.
We're not.
Not a very optimistic.
See, we're realists. We never are optimistic.
We're never too optimistic. And can I say, I mean, the Ecuador situation for him is terrible, and of course, the situation in Britain is terrible. I mean, the British establishment is aching to hand him over to the US so that he can be sent to prison there. I mean, no one should have any doubts about that at all.
Alexander, I have to ask you very, very quickly. When we did the Barr video, I saw a lot of comments about Barr that is he a neocon? He was working for the Bush administration. Do you think that Barr really could make a difference for Assange and even for the Mueller investigation? Or do you think he may be part of the establishment?
Well, he's a part of the American legal establishment. I mean, he was very close, actually, to George H.W. Bush rather than George Bush Jr. But, of course, he did work with George Bush Jr. I don't think he's a neocon. I think he's a very conservative lawyer, very much of the school of Justice Scalia. I think that is the kind of person he is, who is very attentive to the Constitution of the United States. And he's also been White House counsel, and apparently he had a good reputation there. I mean, he may have all kinds of political ideas, but the impression I got reading that 19-page memo that he wrote is of someone who takes the Constitution and due process seriously. So we'll see. I mean, it's a glimmer of hope. Where Assange is concerned, I put it no higher than that. But on Mueller and what Mueller has been doing, he has been sharply critical in a legalistic way. In other words, he's not saying that, Mueller's a bad man or anything of that kind. He's forensically examined Mueller's legal arguments, and in a very brilliant and lawyerly way, he has found them wrong.
I don't know if Barr can help Julian Assange. What Donald Trump wants is help from Barr. So we'll end it on that.
Guys, that was a great show. 2 hours, 20 minutes.
20
plus.
minutes.
Yeah. Wow. 1,400
I want to be paid.
People.
I want to be paid by the word now. Okay.
All right, guys. Thank you for your super chats. Thank you for everything, guys. Real quickly, Peter, what are you looking at for the week ahead?
China.
Yeah.
China. Alexander, what are you looking at for the week?
Well, I'm sorry to end on a sour note, but of course we've got this Brexit horror.
Stop it.
Coming back on us. We have more votes in the House of Commons looming. China, obviously, the world economy. I think what's going to happen with the yellow vests in France, I think that's going to be very big. And of course, Syria and what's happening there. I mean, lots going on in the world. It's very, very busy at the moment. Lots going on, and we just have to wait and see. All
right. Happy Epiphany Day to everybody out there. And tomorrow, if you're celebrating Christmas, Russian Orthodox Christmas, happy Christmas to you guys as well. And that is our show. Go to the Duran shop, buy a t-shirt, help us out. Patreon, PayPal, you can donate. Links are in the description box down below. And of course, guys, share this channel with everybody you know. Hit that like button. Make sure to click the notifications bell so you get updates every time we push out a new video. That is our live chat number 20. Number 20, guys. And hopefully we'll get to live chat number 100 one day in the future. A matter of time. All right. That's it for today, this Sunday. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk in Moscow. Thank you very much. Alexander Mercouris, the Oracle of London in London. Thank you very much. Thank you guys for everything, wherever you are, morning, evening, afternoon. We hope you have a really good Sunday and a great week ahead. Thank you very much. Take care, everybody.